7.4 Calvin cycle reactions. The Calvin cycle reactions occur after light reactions. The Calvin cycle is a series of reactions that produce carbohydrate before returning to the starting point once more. Figure 7.9, the Calvin cycle reactions. The Calvin cycle is divided into three portions: CO2 fixation, CO2 reduction, and regeneration of RuBP. Because 5 G3P are needed to reform 3 RuBP, it takes 3 turns of the cycle to have a net gain of 1 G3P. 2 G3P molecules are needed to form glucose. The cycle is named for Melvin Calvin, who, with colleagues, used the radioactive isotope 14C as a tracer to discover the reactions making up the cycle. This series of reactions used carbon dioxide from the atmosphere to produce carbohydrate. How does carbon dioxide get into the atmosphere? We and most other organisms take in oxygen from the atmosphere and release carbon dioxide to the atmosphere. The Calvin cycle includes 1 carbon dioxide fixation, 2 carbon dioxide reduction, and 3 regeneration of RuBP, ribulose 1, and 5 biphosphate. Fixation of carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide CO2 fixation is the first step of the Calvin cycle. During this reaction, carbon dioxide from the atmosphere is attached to RuBP, a 5 carbon molecule. The result is 1 6 carbon molecule, which splits into 2 3 carbon molecules. The enzyme that speeds this reaction, called RuBP carboxylase, is a protein that makes up about 20 to 50% of the protein content in the chloroplast. The reason for its abundance may be that it is unusually slow. It processes only a few molecules of substrate per second compared to thousands per second for a typical enzyme. And so there has to be a lot of it to keep the Calvin cycle going. Reduction of carbon dioxide. The first 3 carbon molecule in the Calvin cycle is called 3PG, 3-phosphoglycerate. Each of 2 3PG molecules undergoes reduction to G3P in 2 steps. This is the sequence of reactions that uses some ATP and NADPH from the light reactions. This sequence signifies the reduction of carbon dioxide to a carbohydrate because RCO2 has become RCH2O. Energy and electrons are needed for this reaction, and these are supplied by ATP and NADPH. Regeneration of RuBP. Notice that the Calvin cycle reactions in figure 7.9 are multiplied by 3 because it takes 3 turns of the Calvin cycle to allow 1 G3P to exit. Why? Because for every 3 turns of the Calvin cycle, 5 molecules of G3P are used to reform 3 molecules of RuBP, and the cycle continues. Notice that 5 times 3 carbons in G3P equals 3 times 5 carbons in RuB4P. This reaction also uses some of the ATP produced by the light reactions. The importance of the Calvin cycle. G3P glyceraldehyde 3-phosphate is a product of the Calvin cycle that can be converted to other molecules a plant needs. Notice that glucose phosphate is among the organic molecules that result from G3P metabolism, figure 7.10. This is of interest to us because glucose is the molecule that plants and animals most often metabolize to produce the ATP molecules they require for their energy needs. Glucose phosphate can be combined with fructose and the phosphate removed to form sucrose, the molecule that plants use to transport carbohydrates from one part of the plant to the other. Glucose phosphate is also the starting point for the synthesis of starch and cellulose. Starch is the storage form of glucose. Some starch is stored in the chloroplast, but most starch is stored in the amyloplast in roots. Cellulose is a structural component of plant cell walls and becomes fiber in our diet because we are unable to digest it. Figure 7.10, fate of G3P. G3P is the first reactant in a number of plant cells' metabolic pathways. Two G3Ps are needed to form glucose phosphate. Glucose is often considered the end product of photosynthesis. Sucrose is the transport sugar in plants. Starch is the storage form of glucose. And cellulose is a major constituent
Plant cell walls. Go.
A plant can use the hydrocarbon skeleton of G3P to form fatty acids and glycerol, which are combined in plant oils. We are all familiar with corn oil, sunflower oil, or olive oil used in cooking. Also with nitrogen. When nitrogen is added to the hydrocarbon skeleton derived from G3P, amino acids are formed.
Checker progress 7.4. Number 1. What are 3 major steps of the Calvin cycle? That would be fixation of carbon dioxide, reduction of carbon dioxide, and regeneration of RUBP. Number 2. List the substances that a plant cell can make from G3P, the product of the Calvin cycle. That would be glucose phosphate, fatty acid synthesis, amino acid synthesis, fructose phosphate, sucrose, starch, and cellulose.